I'm going to show you how to kind of hack the Betty dress pattern and make it nursing friendly. This has been a highly requested tutorial, so I'm so excited to get into it. But first, there's a few things you probably want to take into account. The first is if this is a dress that you want to wear postpartum, I would recommend possibly sizing up 1 or 2 sizes just to make sure it's giving you extra room and comfort. The second thing is the buttonholes shouldn't be intimidating. I'll show you how to do that in this video. There are a few different ways depending on if you're hand sewing or using a machine. And another option is to use metal snaps or use the snaps and then cover it up with a button. And that's definitely easier for when you're nursing and need easy and quick access. So just take into account there's a few different things you can do besides the buttons if you are intimidated by that or don't want to even have buttons on the front of the garment. If you watched the original Betty dress pattern, I'm going to go into more detail on that video that I'll link here. But I will say in this video, you'll learn a few new techniques and some finishes that might help you as you're sewing the Betty dress. The pattern is linked below for you, and I'm excited to show you how to make this Betty dress nursing friendly. So to start, we're going to cut out our pattern pieces, but we're going to start with our back bodice and our sleeves, and then the back tiers and back neck facing. When you get to the front pieces, like the front bodice, the front tiers, you're going to make a slight alteration. So on the front bodice, instead of cutting the V shape on the front, you're going to create a straight line to the edge of the fold. And then you're going to add 1 inch between the fold and the pattern. This is going to give room for us to fold over the front of the dress to add the buttons. You're going to do the same thing with the extra 1 inch allowance between the fold and the pattern for the top and the bottom tiers of the front. In the center, you're going to cut the pattern piece in half. Unpin the shoulder seams and line them up right sides facing one another with the shoulder seams of the back bodice. As a side note, I want to add that if you don't have a serger or a zigzag stitch on your machine and you want to create a clean finish, I recommend using a French seam. So to do that, you would actually face the wrong sides of the fabric together. And I'm going to show you quickly how to create a French seam. It's going to take a little bit of just changing your mindset when you're going to pin things together, but the French seam will make everything so clean and you don't need a serger. So I would actually just do this on but I did that here and you can see how clean the finish is. When you get to the tiers, you're also going to cut these in half, and then you're going to do a gather stitch, which is going to create that flow. And so what you want to do is lengthen the stitch on your machine as high as it will go. Then you're going to sew across the top of every tier at 1/4 inch and 3/8 of an inch. Then you're going to just grab the bobbin threads and pull the fabric to create this ruffled look. This takes a little bit of time to get the gathers even, so I usually gather most of the tier together and then pin it to the bodice, right sides facing together. You're going to do this for the back and the front. So this is the back of the dress, and I'm just pinning the tier to the back bodice piece, and then I'm going to adjust these gathers and pull at them until they seam even and flush to the back bodice where I can sew straight across. I'm going to pin these in place and keep working at it until the gathers look good. This can take a bit of time, but it's definitely worth it, kind of getting that extra attention so that they look good once they're sewn in place. Sew the tiers at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now you're going to finish the edge with a serger or a zigzag stitch or pinking shears. Continue this process for the front bodice and the front tiers. Now we're going to add the sleeves. To do this, you're going to lay out your dress in front of you, right sides facing up, and then grab your sleeves and line up the notches that are on the pattern. When you line up the notches, you're first going to start with the center and then the sides. When you sew this at 1/2 inch seam allowance, just remember to take it slow. This is a point where if you go too fast and don't pay attention to the details, the sleeves could get messed up really easily. So take it slow, and you can see here how I'm continuing to adjust it when I'm sewing. Iron down the sleeves. This will give you a clean look. With your dress right sides facing together, line up the sleeves at the wrist and then the armpit and the side seams. Make sure the tiers are lined up and pin it all in place. You're going to start at the sleeves and sew 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way up the sleeves to the armpit, and then pivoting and going down the side seams of the dress. Next, cut out your neck facing if you haven't already, and when you get to the front lining of the facing, do the same thing you did on the front bodice, and instead of cutting the V shape, you're just going to go straight across. For the front facing, you don't need to add an extra inch to the facing between the fold because the dress itself will be folded over. But for my facing, I did cut out a little bit wider of a shape around the outer edge. Line up the seams of the front facings together according to the notches. Sew at 1/2 inch seam allowance and press the seams outward once they're sewn. You can finish the outer edge of the facing, and then you're going to line up the shoulder seams and sew around the neck facing. We're going to do an understitch, which basically means we're going to sew the seam allowance towards the facing to make sure it will lie really flat. Now iron down your neck facing towards the inside of the dress and press it really well. Fold the front of the bodice in 1/2 inch and then once more 1/2 inch, and this will create that space for the buttonholes and the buttons. You're going to add stabilizer during this step, and iron everything really well. Now sew at 1/2 inch down the entire front of the dress, making sure the front facing is sandwiched between the front of the bodice. To add buttonholes, we're going to first measure out where we want to place our buttons. So I chose to start about 1/2 inch from the top of the dress, and then from there, between every button, I measured 3 inches. So I just went through and added pins to where I wanted my buttons. If you are manually adding the buttonhole by hand or with a zigzag stitch on your machine, you're going to measure your button, and at the top and the bottom of the button, add 2 pins. You can also use a buttonhole presser foot for this step if that is an option on your sewing machine. For the zigzag method, lower the zigzag stitch width, and then you're going to start at the top pin and count how many zigzag stitches you're going to add, and then pivot and do a right angle to stitch down until you reach the next pin. It helps to count how many stitches you're doing so you can do the exact same on the other side. Then finish out your rectangle, and then you can add the pins back in place and use a seam ripper to create that slit for the button. I recommend trying this a few times on some scrap fabric before you do it on your dress. Next, you're going to take a needle and thread and add the buttons to your dress. Something I didn't show in this video, but you'll definitely finish it out and you can see the step-by-steps on the full Betty dress tutorial, are adding the elastic to the sleeves and hemming the bottom of your dress.